Hey team, today we're gonna make quiche. We're gonna start with the dough. We're making a dough called pâte brisée, and it's basically mealy pie dough, right? Things to know: I have my flour already measured out. I have my salt. I have my butter. My butter is cubed, very small. This is a key part of this recipe is to cube your butter nice and small so we can incorporate all the butter with the flour without over mixing, right? So the idea is to have the most tender dough possible and mixing all the fat into it. Right? I also have about a quarter cup of ice water, and I just put a couple of ice cubes in there. And I have my cake pan that's been provided for you with a paper towel and my canola oil. Okay, how this dough works? Where basically I have half of my flour already in my bowl, I have the other half over here, and my salt's already on my bowl as well. And the goal is for us to incorporate all this butter a little bit at a time into our bowl until we have all the butter in here and it's fully incorporated. Once that happens, we will turn the mixer down and do the second addition of flour. Okay, and then you'll notice that the dough will turn. It will look almost like a grated Parmesan cheese, and I'll show you there in a little bit how it looks, and then we'll add the water. And although sometimes it's not gonna look like it's gonna need the water, it actually needs the water to bind. If not, your dough will be very brittle, and although it's gonna look perfectly fine when it cooks, it's gonna fall apart. Okay, so it's really important that we have all these ingredients here. It might not need all the water, but it's gonna need some water. Okay, so let's get started. I like my mixer about medium heat or medium speed, and then I take my butter and I add it a couple of pieces at a time. If you feel like your butter is jumping or your flour is going all over the place, then obviously turn down your mixer and just take a little bit more time doing this. At the beginning, you're gonna notice like it's not doing anything in there, but it actually is. It's smashing the butter a little bit at a time. The more butter we add, the more we'll notice that the mixer is gonna have some resistance, and you're gonna notice that the texture of the flour changes, and that's kind of what we're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to continue adding this butter in here a little bit at a time, and I'll show you when I have all the butter incorporated. Note to self: try not to keep the butter in your hand as it'll warm up. Your butter should be ice cold, and that way it won't melt while it's receiving the friction from the mixer. Okay, I'll see you guys in a little bit. Okay, team. I finished adding all my butters, and I went from kind of like a grated cheese kind of look, and then all of a sudden this happened. It's all attached to my dough. It kind of looks like a thick paste, and it's kind of sticky. Okay, now our goal is going to be to I like removing it from the paddle before I start one more time, and we're going to put the second addition of flour in here, and you'll see how the dough will go back to being crumbly. And I'm going to add the flour before I start the machine again. And I like doing this on low speed. And you'll see that the dough will start from first being really attached to your paddle to start loosening up. You might get some chunks that are still attached to the paddle, and after a little bit I'll just go in there and move it around and make sure that it's getting well mixed. Okay, I still have some chunks that are attached here, but a lot of my dough is starting to look all crumbly, like so. Okay, and that's telling you you're in a good spot. Okay, so we're gonna mix this for a little bit more and then just add the water to it a little bit at a time. And as this is mixing, I'll tell you, when you start adding the water, we're gonna add a little bit at a time, probably like a half an ounce at a time. So I like adding this in between 2 to 3 additions, okay? And you'll know that it's ready because it'll start pulling away from your bowl, okay? So here we go. Add a little bit of water like that. And I'm gonna turn on the speed a little bit so it picks up the water. My dough is attached to my paddle, so I'm just gonna push it down. And you want it to be soft, but you don't want it to stick to your fingers. If it sticks to your fingers, you got too much water in there. Okay? So alright. Here we go. I don't think we need any more water. I'm gonna check. It's soft. It doesn't stick to my fingers. Okay. My bowl is clean. Everything is attached to my paddle, which tells me that my dough is ready to go. Now I'm going to roll the dough out, which I'm going to show you in the next video, and then we're going to put it in our pan, and then we have to go in the freezer for about 15 minutes, and then we can bake it. Okay, so I'll see you guys in a little bit. Alright guys, so now it's time to roll out the dough. I took one of my pieces of parchment, I took my pan, and I drew a circle with a pen. And then after I drew a circle, I used my finger kind of as a guidance, and I went up about 3 inches outside of that circle, and I threw a line in 4 spots, almost like, you know, like north, south, east, and west. And then I started tracing that. See if you guys can see this. So I have the cake pan is the inner circle, and then the other line is the outer circle. I'm almost done with it, and I'm just kind of matching those lines at about 3 inches outside of my cake pan. We're basically using 3 inches because we're gonna have the 8 inches of the pan in the bottom. This is an 8-inch cake pan. Notice that your recipe calls for a 9-inch. I don't need you to suffer through making really thin quiche dough quite yet. So we're giving a little bit of forgiving space there. But know that we have 8 inches here, and then 2 inches coming up, and then 2 inches coming up. That's why we're giving this circle 3 inches on each side, because we're gonna have some overhang in this dough that we want. And we will not cut this dough until the quiche is done. So it's very important that your dough is big enough to overlap all the way around, because that's what's going to hold it and not let it shrink. So at the end of the day, you should end up with something like this that has a circle and then a bigger circle around it. Do I roll the dough on top of this? No. Could you? You surely can. Just make sure you flip it over, and you're not rolling it on the side where you roll with a pen or a Sharpie, but you're rolling it in the opposite side. I actually like rolling it on the table with a little bit of flour, and then I use this as what's going to help me measure if I have enough dough or not. Okay, so I'm going to set up and grab some flour in my rolling pin, and we'll get rolling it out. Alright team, I have my dough right here. I made it into a ball. I like making the dough into a ball, and it's going to provide us a nice circle. Okay, I got some flour here so I can dust my table. And the goal here, there's a variation here from the recipe, okay? And the recipe tells you to put the dough down and have flour in all parts of it, which I'm doing right now, right? And then it tells you to roll it out and then go 90 degrees and roll it out. And you're gonna end up with a square and a frustrating one. And it's really hard to fix from a square to a circle. So I'm gonna show you what I actually do. I like pushing this dough down right in the center, trying to keep that circle when I'm doing so, okay? That's why I turn it into a ball before I start rolling it out. And I also get plenty of flour on my table and in the surrounding areas because we're gonna make this fairly big, right? And I got a rolling pin. I got a plastic one. Like this is a fondant one. If you have a wooden one, it works just fine. If you don't have a rolling pin, a bottle works just fine. The goal is that we are rolling it out and getting it somewhat even. If you feel like you can't do it with a bottle or something else, feel free to swing by the school and grab one. We got plenty. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna roll this dough almost to each side to the end. I'm gonna show you. See if you can see that right there. But I'm not rolling it all the way through. And then I'm going to switch to 90 degrees. But this is the only time that I'm gonna do that. So my space that I roll it was like so. I turn it 90 degrees. And I'm gonna do this one more time. I'm gonna roll it out about 90 degrees. Just to get it enough to that to the previous level. All right, so we have it squared. Now I'm just gonna twist a little bit, and I'm going to roll in the same position, and then I'm going to twist it a little bit more, and I'm going to roll in the same position. And you're gonna notice that you're gonna start getting back into a circle motion. It almost looks like the dough is turning into a curve, and it's just because you're starting to shape it into a circle. Okay, and you're gonna continue on. If you feel like your dough is sticking in the bottom, that surrounding flour that you have on your table is your friend. Just roll your dough around like so, twist it over, and here we go one more time. And you'll notice I start getting bigger, so you're gonna start rolling a little further out and further out every single time that you do this. And we want the dough about a 1/4 inch. One thing that you should avoid is this twisting motion. Just always roll straight out. That way you'll have a even pressure in both sides, and you'll end up with a much better dough. Okay. And this dough is fairly forgiving, so if you get a rip or anything like that, go ahead and pinch it, and it should work just fine. Alright, now I'm going to check because I think I'm there. So I'll just take my drawing and put it over my dough and make sure both of my circles fit in there, which this one does, okay? And then with my fingers, I'm going to go and mark wherever I see the outer line, because we're going to cut it right there. Okay, and I'm just marking it with my fingers. You can try, some people try cutting it with the paper, but the paper rips and then it's kind of a mess. So just mark it with your fingers, and then you can remove your paper, and you should have a pretty good line on where we're gonna cut. And then I'll just take my knife. Nothing special. I'm just trying to have somewhat of a circle shape here. And all this extra dough we're gonna need later on. So don't get rid of all the extra dough, just save it. Okay? And then you should end up with something that looks like this. I'm manipulating mine fairly easy. I wouldn't recommend for you to do that. If you're going to move this dough, take your rolling pin and place your rolling pin towards closest to you, and then grab the dough and roll it in the rolling pin. That's the best way to move the dough right there. Okay, and I'm gonna move the dough out of the way. I have my cake pan right here, and this doesn't require parchment and it doesn't require flour. It just requires canola oil, and it requires quite a bit of it. Okay, it's really important that you put a good amount of oil in here, because if you don't, you won't be able to get your quiche out. Okay, so I'm making sure that I get the corners first, and then my paper towel is to help me spread the oil. So I'm not only getting the bottom and the sides, but I'm also getting the top right there, because I don't want my dough to stick. And then if I have any extra olive or any extra canola oil, I pour it back into my container, but it should be fairly heavy. Okay, you'll notice that you'll have a pretty greasy pan. All right, now I have my dough in my rolling pin right here, and I'm gonna let my dough fall. And this is kind of the same way that you would put fondant on a cake. Okay, and we're gonna let about an inch overhang in the back of the pan, and then we're gonna just lay this dough right here, like so. Try not to press it too much, and then we're gonna pick it up with one hand and push it into the pan with the other. Okay, pick it up, and I'm using the back of my finger. I'm not pushing it down like this. I'm pushing it down with the back of my hand and getting it in there. I'm trying not to press too hard on it, and then you're gonna notice that sometimes it's not super even, so just kind of try to straighten it out to the best of your abilities. It's okay to have a little bit of wrinkle. Okay, so you'll notice that I'll start right here, getting rid of the wrinkles by getting my finger all the way to the bottom corner, making sure there's no air pocket there. Okay, and start walking my way around this cake pan, and notice that I have some wrinkles there, and I'm just letting them be. Okay, and by wrinkles I mean some folds, right? Like the dough is gonna tend to fold. I try to take some out, but some of them you can't. So I just leave them in there, because if you start messing with the dough, you might rip it. Okay, you should end up with something that looks like that. It's overhang, and it's all the way to the bottom. Alright, then I'm going to take this guy, and I'm going to put him in the freezer for about 15 minutes. We're going to put a piece of parchment and beans in here, or rice, or whatever dry grains you have, because we're going to blind bake this, okay? But I don't like putting the parchment with the beans in there right now, because the dough is a little wet or a little soft, and then the weight might make the parchment stick to the dough. So I like freezing it first and then moving forward. Alright, so I'll see you in a couple of minutes once this freezes. Alright guys, so my quiche dough is frozen. It's been in the freezer for about 15-18 minutes, somewhere like that. I cut my circle that I had on my parchment paper. I just took a pair of scissors to it all the way in the outside, and now I'm going to use this to create a barrier in between the dough and some dry beans and some rice I have to give it some weight. Okay, so that way the dough doesn't expand, which is what we're looking for. Make sure that when you're doing this, that the side where you wrote is up and not against the dough, because the dough will pick up the marker. Okay, and then I'm just gonna push it in here, and then I keep a bag of dry beans and rice for when I'm baking, and I'm gonna carefully pour in there. Pour as much as you can. I understand if you don't have enough to get all the way to the top. This is a lot of beans and rice that I'm putting in here. I'm pushing it towards the sides, because the important part is not only that the bottom doesn't grow, but also the sides don't push in. Right? So I'm gonna pour everything I have in here. Old parchment paper right here. Get rid of that. And now I'm going to go into my oven at 375 degrees for 35 to 45 minutes. I have my dough on a sheet tray, just in case some of the dough falls down, so you don't want it to mess up your oven. It smells like burning all over the place just because the dough is hitting the element. But anyways, we're gonna look for, I usually go 35 minutes, and then I let it cool down a little bit, take the paper off, and then do another 10 minutes. When I take the paper off, I look for any cracks or any holes in the dough. If there's any, use your remainder dough to patch it, and then put it back in the oven for about 10 more minutes. Okay? And your dough should be, it's supposed to get really dark, right? But it's supposed to get really dark after it bakes the second time. This time it's gonna look somewhat golden. Alright? And I'm gonna show you that once I finish baking this guy off. Alright guys, my quiche dough is out of the oven. I did 35 minutes. I let it rest for 10. I pulled the beans out. I baked it for another 10. And this is kind of what it looks like. I have a couple of places, like I don't know if you can tell right here. I have a little hole there, and then I have on the fold right here, I have a little gap. And this is a good time to take, like I have a piece of dough here from the leftover dough, and this is a good time to patch it. And what we're trying to avoid is any of the custard to go down in there, because then it'd be close to impossible to remove the quiche from the pan. Okay, so even if it's a thicker layer, it's not a big deal. We're gonna cut a lot of this stuff off once it's ready, and we're just gonna go like that. And I just have a little bit of a patching to do here. Now, while I've been waiting for this dough to cool down a little bit, I have my custard pretty much here. So I have my eggs. I'm gonna switch some things around here. But I have my eggs ready to go, 6 eggs. And I have my milk and cream that I scalded, and now it's fairly cool. I can touch the pan, right? And the recipe calls for letting it blend for a long time and put it in a blender. Stick blender works just fine. Just make sure that your milk is not too hot, so when you put it on your eggs, it's not going to cook them right away. But just pour your cream and milk in there, and then just give them a quick blend. Just 1 sec. And you just want it to be evenly spread throughout the mixture. Okay, I like doing it on low and not having a lot of I don't like having a lot of foam on this. But you'll notice that your mixture will look kind of like creme brulee or creme brulee batter, right? And then I'm just gonna salt this really well. Although I have bacon and cheese on the quiche, I'm still gonna get a pretty good amount of salt. And your recipe calls for white pepper. Feel free to use white pepper if you like. I like putting black pepper there. I feel like too many people season their food without trying it, so I like them to see the pepper. And then I'm just gonna put a couple of pinches of nutmeg in here for my custard, and then I'm just gonna mix it one more time. This should look almost like a thin French toast batter, right? And now we're pretty much ready. I have this, I have my quiche dough, and I have my bacon and onion mixture. I diced my bacon. I have about an onion and a half, and I cooked my bacon. When it was halfway done, I added my onions in there, and I cooked it for another, I would say, 10 minutes. I wasn't looking for any brown on the onions. I was just looking for them to get soft. So I just cooked it on medium low. Okay, I'm gonna rearrange everything here, and I'll see you in a second. We'll stack this whole thing up. All right, team, we're all set right here. In order to fill our quiche dough, my filling, my cheese, and my custard. Okay, we're gonna start with some cheese. I always like putting cheese in the bottom of my quiche, and I feel like it helps me get the custard to really stick to that dough in the bottom. Okay, and we're basically gonna put layers in there. I just put a little bit of cheese in there. I'm gonna take a third of my bacon and onion mixture and place it in here. I kind of spread it around without hitting the sides of my dough, and be really careful with that because your dough will start to crumble. Okay, so I put a third in there. I put some cheese, and then I'm gonna grab my custard and I'm gonna pour it in here. And I want to make sure that I put enough custard in here until I get to the top of where my filling was. And then once again, I'll pour some cheese in there. And then I'll take the second of the 3 parts of my filling and I put it in here. And know that, although we're making quiche Lorraine, which is bacon, caramelized onions, and cheese, we can do many others. If you're going to use vegetables in here, make sure that you cook them ahead of time and you drain them, because they're going to start releasing some water, and we want to make sure that we don't have a watery quiche. It'll make your dough really soggy and it'll break apart. Okay, and now we're in the second addition of custard, and we want to fill this guy all the way to the top. Okay, excuse me. And here's the third addition of cheese, so I'm just gonna take the rest of my cheese and pour it in here. And no, I'm not saving any for the top because it's baking for over an hour and the cheese will burn. And put the rest of my filling in here. And this should make a fairly tall quiche here. And then I'm going to put the last of my quiche custard in here. And you should have a little bit left over of your custard, and that's okay. And when you look at your recipe, it doesn't say what temperature to bake it. You're gonna bake it at 325 degrees, and you're gonna go for an hour and 25 to an hour and 45 minutes, somewhere in there, depending on how long it takes for it to be cooked. We're gonna check this like we check a cake. Take a toothpick right to the middle, and then make sure that it's not wet. Know that if you have a lot of cheese in there, that it might be cheese and it looks like it's wet, but it's not. But it should be between an hour 25 and an hour 45. I always rotate it halfway through. All right, so I'll show you guys once the quiche is completed. All right, team, so I'll let it sit in the water for about 5 minutes, and now we're just gonna invert it. So just take your tray, put it right over your quiche, like so, and then pick the whole thing up, quiche underneath, put your hand firmly on the top, and flip it over, and that way you should be able to shake it right off. All right, there we go. There we go. Some of my crust stuck, so I got lucky there. Luckily, we put some of that hot water in there. If I started banging it, it will break apart. But I think it will survive. Then I'm gonna grab my plate, put it on top of the quiche, and then invert it one more time. Just make sure when you're doing this that you don't press it too hard, and then you should be good to go. You should have a nice tall quiche. This will make a very nice brunch. Okay, you can serve it by itself. You can serve it with some salad. I personally like mine with a little bit of hot sauce, but many choices. So that's a nice custard right there.